Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and Black History Month continues. We take a look at the dope man when I put Gordon Parks Jr.'s Superfly against Mario Van Peebles' New Jack City. And this one was a real interesting one to get through. So let's just dive right on in to the nitty and the picky. I said both these movies deal with the dope man, the drug slinging motherfuckers and shit. So first up, we have Gordon Parks Jr.'s Superfly, starring Ron O'Neal as Priest, who is like he's a coke dealer, and he's trying to get out of the business and stuff. Now the movie opens brilliantly, like it has that same kind of over the head, like very high frame shot, like kind of how you see the opening of Shaft of Gordon Parks, who was of course Gordon Parks Jr.'s father. And so they kind of have similar filming technique styles and stuff. And it opens with these two junkies that are looking to like kind of bum rush a dealer so they can get the drugs and shit without having to pay for them and stuff. And the soundtrack done brilliantly by Curtis Mayfield. I will say that like this is one of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time, and the soundtrack is, in my opinion, definitely way better than the movie. But it definitely gives like it makes the movie look a lot better than it actually is because it has a badass soundtrack and these characters move through it and stuff. And of course, it opens with little child running wild, and the music never seems out of place in this film, And then we see them try to the way we first see Ron O'Neal's character Priest is he's laying in bed with a naked woman, and he does a couple of toots of cocaine from his little necklace thing, and then he's got to go do some business, and then he gets bum rushed by these junkies, and then we see him chasing after, running down like a motherfucking track star and shit. You clearly see from the start that this dude don't fuck around, And after this little incident, he kind of wants to get out of the game a little bit, and so decides to make that one final like major deal that's gonna set him up for life with a cool million and stuff. So tries to get everybody together that's in his team and stuff, and get some help from an old partner, Julius Harris, who's absolutely brilliant in the film. Very heartbreaking moment when they kill that motherfucker, because he's out of the game, but he gets in it one more time just to help Priest out and stuff. And what this movie does, though, is it I wouldn't necessarily say it entirely glorifies the dope game, but it doesn't necessarily condemn it either. It does, in its own way, kind of show you all sides of it. There's that brilliant photo montage of like the whole exchange of cocaine, motherfuckers that deal it, as they prepping it and then selling it, and then the motherfuckers using it, and it's done with the way the music is. It's almost comical in some sort, especially when you see the motherfuckers using it and stuff. It's definitely played for a few laughs to kind of shrug it off, but it also shows like the competition of the business and stuff and how brutal that shit is, because of course the motherfuckers won't turf money, I guess, capitalism, if you will. Motherfuckers be killing each other just for the profit type thing. And, we even see a bit of the black revolutionary side of it, who's trying to get rid of the drug element in the neighborhood, try to clean it up and make it respectable and stuff. And of course, the movie is like very sexy at times. There's that bathtub scene where Ron O'Neal is with that one chick, a very good looking woman, and it's the way it's edited and shot. It is very sexy and very stylish too for the times. It kind of shows off a lot of the styles of the 1970s. The movie is called Superfly, so of course motherfuckers are gonna look super fly. But the movie itself, though, is kind of lame in parts. Even the fucking ending is kind of drab. I mean, it's badass at the end, when he's fighting, throwing them kung fu moves on him, throwing motherfuckers in trash cans and shit. But then, the way he gets out of it, it's kind of badass, but in a way it's a little bit lame, because he's just like, well, I got a hit put out, so if I die, then you die, or your whole family dies and all that shit. And he just drives off into the sunset with that badass Curtis Mayfield music playing, But it doesn't really do anything to like give you much outside of like, let's show how cool this motherfucker is. He don't fuck around, that's for sure, but like, we move forward to New Jack City, where Mario Van Peebles' New Jack City, where cocaine is now graduated to crack, and the epidemic is far worse than anybody could ever imagine. Crack is a motherfucker, and the film centers around a whole new kind of kingpin, Nino Brown, played brilliantly by Wesley Snipes. I would say that Wesley Snipes gives a far better performance than Ron O'Neal in Superfly, and everybody else, everybody in the film very smartly dressed. You know, especially when motherfuckers got money, they ain't gonna dress in rags and stuff. But he starts out dealing cocaine, but then his associate, played by Alan Payne, he starts experimenting and then comes up with crack, and then that becomes like the fucking drug everybody just has to have. You know, one in particular is Pookie, played by Chris Rock. Chris Rock may be the best performance in this film. It's a very heartbreaking performance that he gives, as because he starts out in the film. Ice-T, who plays a cop in the film, he's on a little undercover sting, and he goes chasing after him, ends up shooting him in the leg. You know, so he started out having a job in the crack business and stuff, but then ends up becoming a crackhead himself. And the scenes that they show of like the crack dens and stuff, that shit is like a fucking horror film. You know, Mario Van Peebles, of course, was the son of the great, or is the son of the great Melvin Van Peebles, who inadvertently kind of started the whole blaxploitation movement with his brilliant film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. And here we have Mario Van Peebles in a way kind of like kicking off all the like the drug films of the fucking 90s, you know, inadvertently. Because for a movie that oftentimes feels like a PSA on drugs, it's wildly entertaining. You know, there's not a dull moment in this film. Yeah, sure, there's some of those obligatory like monologues about like why motherfuckers feel the way that they do. You know, of course, Ice-T plays the cop, and of course his mother was killed randomly by a junkie, and then later on we find out that junkie was Nino, or not yeah, it was a junkie. The junkie was Nino Brown before he was anybody and shit. And that scene, like Ice-T is a better actor than motherfuckers give him credit for, because like just that whole, like you could tell in his face, like just the intensity of emotions and shit, like it don't play. And of course, like Mario Van Peebles is also in the film. He's the one that sets up the task force that's really just Ice-T and Judd Nelson, who are like two batshit crazy cops. Nobody wants to work with them, and they actually get shit done. They're fighting a war, basically. They need fucking, as Mario Van Peebles puts it, they need New Jack cops to take down New Jack gangsters and shit. And you know they go through some shit. Of course, you know Ice-T ends up rehabilitating Pookie and getting him as the fucking CI and shit. But then they catch on, and then they end up killing Pookie and stuff. You know, the film's like a lot of danger in the film, and it definitely shows all the elements of like what's going on with the drug shit and stuff. You know, like I said, does at times feel like a PSA. There's even that little fucking disclaimer at the end, you know, talking about this is a fictional story, but there's Nino Browns all over the place and stuff, you know, kind of a call to action. It's like we need to do shit before drugs destroy the country and shit. But like it's one of those films that just like, despite its fucking message mentality, it does kind of just make it an entertaining film, you know, because there's a lot of action in the film, and a lot of quotes, a lot of very quotable, you know. Of course, probably the most quotable one is sit your $5 ass down before I make change. You know, of course, like Wesley Snipes is absolutely brilliant in the film, and there's a lot of layers to it that are very profound, because you know you see Nino Brown watching Scarface on several occasions, and this was a thing where like a lot of, especially like hip hop in general, was inspired by Scarface and all that shit, and a lot of young brothers that would idolize Scarface, not realizing that you can get your ass shot just as much as Scarface did. And of course, the woman in the film makes a comment like, you're gonna be just like Scarface, but you're not gonna be as dumb as Scarface. Well, like everybody gets caught eventually and shit. And of course, you know, after Pookie goes down, Ice-T decides he's just gonna infiltrate the shit. And, you know, they finally hunt this motherfucker down after that shit goes awry. And they get Nino Brown in the end. You know, it comes real close to like Ice-T just killing that motherfucker, especially after he found out that's the one that actually killed his mom. But they hold him back, and they go through the whole trial and everything. And what Nino Brown pitches while he's on the stand is some of the same shit that had been like some of the same like statements that had been made ever since the 30s gangster films that Warner Brothers used to make with like Jimmy Cagney and Humphrey Bogart. It made it where it's like it's capitalism, you know, and not nobody really to blame. He's just living out the American dream. You know, he is like a capitalist. He's not a, you know, he may be a gangster, but he's also a capitalist at the same time. So really, he shouldn't be under indictment type thing. And so, but even though he essentially gets away with just a year in prison, like he doesn't get away for long because one of the neighborhood people that's fed up with his shit just shoots him. This old man that shoots him, and the old man will probably end up in jail too. But you know, at least he's done something that really was a community service because, you know, but then again, you kill one Nino Brown, another one's gonna fucking pop up and shit. And so the film also leaves you with the sense of just what the fuck is it all worth? What does it all mean? You know, will this shit ever be, you know, controlled or contained? You know, and as we see now over 30 years later, you know, if it ain't crack, it's fentanyl or some other bullshit. So, you know, as long as motherfuckers are living in poverty, they're going to look for something to use to like fucking make themselves feel better and shit instead of actually like trying to be better. So this round clearly has to go to New Jack City because one, the acting's better. I really feel the acting's better because I mean, there is a lot of shit in Superfly that feels a lot more naturalistic and stuff, but it just doesn't like, it just doesn't hold you the way that New Jack City does. And I think it's a lot better of a movie, a lot more entertaining and shit, and does more to say about what its subject is instead of just like, oh, we got this badass motherfucker dealing drugs and shit. Nobody's really badass in New Jack City. That's kind of the beauty of it. Everybody's fucked up and flawed in their own way and stuff. But the one thing that Superfly does have on New Jack City, I would say that the soundtrack is way fucking better. Like that soundtrack by Curtis Mayfield is one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. But Superfly is one of those movies where the soundtrack is a lot better than the movie. So for anybody keeping score, that is 76-61. 90s has been on a streak lately. 70s are only up by 15 now, man. The 90s are continuing to shrink that lead that the 70s have, and they still got a long way to go before they can take the lead again, but the way they've been working seems like they might take the lead. But, I mean, as we've seen from the 70s, too, them motherfuckers will hold strong. So stay tuned for more. Of course, this is a main event round. The next main event we have one every Saturday, will be Car Wash versus The Wash, continuing the Black History theme. And we will continue to have more Afrocentric themed bonus rounds too as the month continues and stuff. And if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I mean, all this shit is open for debate. This is one asshole's opinion. I'm on a really long self-indulgent journey to see which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. And it's looking like the 70s, but I mean the 90s keep coming back with them 1-2 punches and shit. They've been on like a 4-film streak, man, and they ain't fucking giving up. So for all you film professors out there, if you want to use this shit, feel free, but we got to talk compensation. As well as all you film bros out there, man. If you think you know shit about film, you need to tune into this shit because this is the real deal, homie feel. So stay tuned for more of these. This is the 70s versus the 90s, and it's only heating up, baby.